thanks everyone for joining us this evening. My name's John Gershman with Sulo, the Philippine Studies Initiative at New York University, the primary sponsor for this evening's panel. I just would like to acknowledge the sponsors and introduce the moderator for this evening, and then we'll get underway. So the sponsors include Sulo, the Philippine Studies Initiative at NYU, the New York Southeast Asia Network, the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies, and the Weatherhead Center for East Asian Studies at Columbia. Very excited to have this important panel at this particular moment. Our moderator this evening is, I am assuming, well known to all of the folks who are attending the webinar, Sheila Coronel, who is the director of the Center for Investigative Journalism at Columbia School of Journalism. And she is going to moderate this evening's panel. So without further ado, Sheila.
Thank you, John. Good evening or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. This is a very timely panel. This year, I don't know if you use the word celebrate, but we mark the 50th anniversary of martial law. This was 1972 when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. He said to save the republic and reform society. It's also the 36th anniversary of People Power. And it's also, 2 months before a landmark election where Ferdinand Marcos seems to be the leading candidate. And we may be contemplating the possibility of another Marcos presidency. The first one, for those of you who are too young to remember, the first one lasted 20 years between 1965 and 1986, following 20 years of a somewhat chaotic Philippine democracy. And now we have, we've had since 1986, somewhat chaotic democracy, and again seeing the prospect of another Marcos in power. So I'm very pleased that tonight we will have veterans, and I can say that with confidence, the veterans of the anti-dictatorship and pro-democracy struggle in the Philippines. They're going to talk about the legacy of Marcos, also talk about the resistance during the Marcos era. What lessons did we learn from that? And who, what, where is the resistance now? And also answer the question of why is another Marcos running for president after People Power in 1986. So to start off that discussion, I'll introduce our speakers in alphabetical order. Ed Garcia is based in Manila, one of the framers of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. He has taught at the Ateneo de Manila University and the University of the Philippines, and has worked with both Amnesty International and International Alert for over 2 decades in the UK. Loida Nicolas Lewis is a lawyer, business person, proud grandmother, and chair of the Reginald Lewis Foundation, named after her late husband, the entrepreneur Reginald Lewis. She's back in the day, between 1972 and 1979, she published the New York-based Ningas Kugon, or Brushfire, an anti-Marcos monthly magazine, for which she and her staff were blacklisted by the Philippine government. And we have joining us from San Francisco, Rodel Rodis. He is a Filipino American lawyer and the first Filipino American elected to public office in San Francisco, having served in the San Francisco Community College Board, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and the San Francisco Civil Grand Jury. He has taught Philippine history and the history of Filipinos in America at San Francisco State University, where he was chair of the Filipino American Studies Program. He's founder of the National Federation of Filipino American Associations and the Filipino Bar Association of Northern California. So glad to see you all here. What I'm going to do today is to ask each of our panelists to give a 3 to 5 minute opening statement to address any of the questions that I'd outlined previously. We'll do this again in a very democratic way, alphabetically. So Ed, please open this discussion.
Good evening to all of you. although it's early in the morning here. Yeah. The title of my very brief presentation is People's Power, Past, Present, and Future, which I hope to accomplish in 3 minutes. As the brave people of Ukraine remind us once again that courage conquers fear, allow me to recall how Filipinos stood their ground against dictatorship more than 3 decades ago, and today are asked, what have we learned? History and memory. It was the novelist Milan Kundera who penned the lines, "The struggle against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting." As May 2022 approaches, it seems that the battle lines are drawn between those who desire to wish away the past against those who believe that the past continues to be present. Between those who intone that we should move on and unify against those who believe that we have to learn the lessons of history, recognize our shortcomings, as well as build on our strengths. 36 years ago, many of us put our lives on the line on the streets surrounding the military camps around EDSA for a number of reasons. Resist dictatorship and unleash the energies to advance a new way of doing politics. Oust a dictator and the people in power by unleashing our people's power. Address the reality of impunity and protect the rights of people in our quest for social justice. Put a stop to the atrocities of martial law and put the primacy on human rights. And finally, renounce the politics of exclusion and make poverty history and inequality a thing of the past. Reality and courage. It is clear to me that for the most part, we have failed the promise of EDSA, and this is no time for excuses. It requires humility to admit our failures, and more particularly, our inability to improve the lives of the most vulnerable in our society, those who continue to be poor and excluded from the reward of honest hard work. It requires courage to go back to the drawing boards and to resolve to do even better, though resources may be scarce and the path forward uncertain. But whatever happens after May 2022, it is important that the principled coalition that is currently gathering pace in the country can be sustained beyond the elections. Hope in the future. Hope is the belief that a new day is possible because we strive to make it happen. Hope is a verb. And to the present post-people power generation, the challenge remains. Keep hope alive. Marami pong salamat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Can we hear from Loida now, please?
Yes. Okay. I would like to answer the question, why is there another Marcos running for president after what happened in 1986? So I attribute this phenomenon to three things. First, forgiveness by Tita Cory. Second, change in the population of the Philippines after 30 years. And third, the evil of unmitigated corruption, shameless falsehood, treachery in favor of China. They are now united under Marcos Jr. So first, forgiveness by President Cory Aquino. On November 4, 1991, Imelda Marcos and her children were allowed to return to the Philippines by President Cory Aquino after their living in exile in Hawaii for more than 5 years to face charges of fraud and corruption. It took 17 years from January 2000 to November 9, 2018, when the Sandigan Bayan convicted Mrs. Marcos for creating private foundations in Switzerland and other places during the time of martial law to deposit illegally government funds. She was sentenced to 42 years, but because she was, quote, advanced in years, she never served the sentence. Mrs. Marcos filed an appeal to the Supreme Court, and after nearly 3.5 years, no action on the part of the Supreme Court. In the United States, though, the U.S. Court of Appeals of the 9th District in October 24, 2012, convicted her of stolen wealth from the country and ordered her to pay $353 million, which includes interest and penalties. And she has not paid a single dollar, and she's given up to 2035 to pay it up. In the meantime, Marcos Jr. was convicted of non-payment of income tax from 1982 to 1985 when he was vice governor and governor of Ilocos Norte. Up to now, he has not paid a single tax. So that's what happened. They're here. The second phenomenon, change in the population from 1986 people power to 2022. The population of the Philippines grew from 56 million in 1986 to 112 million this year. So 50% of this population is under 40 years old. So 65 million are registered for 2022. The 6 million new voters are mostly the young. And so where is the attention of these young people? 4 hours a day are spent on their device, cell phone, where 85% of those who own a device are on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. They never experienced the kleptocracy of those 21 years of martial law, where people's job got less money or no jobs at all, where Filipinos began to work overseas to better their economic conditions, where 70,000 were imprisoned as political prisoners, 34,000 were tortured, 3,200 were killed, and this is according to the Amnesty International. The poor got poorer, and the Marcos family and his cronies got richer and enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. Most of all, while 40% of the Filipino people were going hungry, eating once a day or maybe not at all, where Smoky Mountain of trash signified the desperate status of the people, Marcos deposited in foreign banks $10 billion and tons of gold stolen from central bank. Under the Marcos regime, the country's foreign debt skyrocketed from $600 million in 1966 when he came into power to $27 billion in 1986. The third, the evil of unmitigated corruption, shameless falsehood, treachery for China are now united under Marcos Jr. So when Marcos Jr. was defeated by the Congresswoman, widow of the beloved mayor of Naga, Leni Robredo, the Marcos family continued with a vengeance their systematic campaign to propagate another universe that the Marcos martial law years were the, quote, golden years of Philippine history. They hired Cambridge Analytica to target these young Filipinos in their electronic device and fed them day in and day out lies, distorted history, false claims that Farkas Jr. had an educational achievement in Oxford, that the laws he passed were authored by him, windmills in the north, oh, in windmills in the north of Luzon was initiated by him. They are all lies. But following Hitler's propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, who said, repeat a lie 10,000 times and it becomes the truth. Actually, Imelda Marcos repeated the same thing when she said, perception is real, truth is not. And so with their nefarious plan intact, the unsuspecting Filipinos took that false history book, hook, line, and sinker. And to add to the tragedy, Duterte's daughter, Sara, has agreed to be Marcos Jr.'s vice president. So her 25% in the polls added to Marcos' 25%, his numbers shot up to 50%. If election were held now, China has come into the shores, not only at the West Philippine Sea, but Marcos Jr. himself has gone with Xi Jinping in Beijing. And so he said, I would set aside the landmark 2016 decision of the International Tribunal that favor the Philippines over China. And so that's a whole amount of money coming from China. And that, in short, is the reason why a Marcos Jr. is the front runner of the 2022 national elections after the people power of 1986. But my last word is, in the end, I have faith in the Filipino people. But it is our job, those of us who know better, to tell the truth to our people. And so, come May 20, 2022, Lenny will win. Thank you.
Thank you, Loida. Rodel, opening words, please.
Okay, thank you. It is fitting on the 50th anniversary of the declaration of martial law that we take time to reflect on what lessons we can derive from our resistance to the Marcos dictatorship. It is interesting that was 50 years ago when Marcos closed the courts and Congress and deprived us of our rights. But at that time, that was only 30 years from when the Filipino people experienced a similar trauma, and that was the Japanese occupation. And much of what happened during the Marcos period happened during the Japanese period. And we did not, back in 72, reflect on what lessons were learned from the resistance to the Japanese. So now, 50 years later, we're looking at what lessons can we learn from the resistance to the Marcos dictatorship. Now, many of us can only reflect on our experience here in the United States. I'm sure Edmund and others will reflect on the experience of the resistance within the Philippines. But here in the United States, we organized opposition. When martial law was declared, by coincidence, we had a newspaper in San Francisco that I had formed, and we had correspondents around the country, and we asked them to come to San Francisco so we could create a network around the US for the newspaper. When we were crossing the Golden Gate Bridge to Marin for this for our conference, our seminar, whatever, we learned martial law was just declared. So we spent the whole weekend planning our opposition and what we were going to do. We organized a nationwide vigil in front of all the Philippine consulates to oppose it. And our central strategy then was that Marcos could not declare martial law without the support of the US, and we have to cut US support for Marcos in order to stop martial law. So we began our our campaign by meeting with Senator Cranston of California, and he delivered a speech denouncing Marcos and martial law. And we started working with Congress to cut various bills. And whenever Marcos and Imelda and any of them would come to the US, we were ready with demonstrations, pickets everywhere. And that was critical in terms of our strategy. Now, when we organized the group that the first opposition to Marcos was the National Committee for the Restoration of Civil Liberties in the Philippines. And we got an office at the UNITA's house in Berkeley, where we was our headquarters. And right next door to us was the group fighting the Brazilian dictatorship. And I asked them how long they'd been fighting the Brazilian dictatorship. And the organizers there told me that they'd been fighting them for 7 years. At that time, we were only a few months old. And I said, oh, that's not going to happen to us. The Filipino people would never accept martial law. That our martial law would be over. The people will revolt. That was the confidence that I had back in 1972, 73. And of course, we realized that martial law lasted until 1986, far longer than it took the Brazilians to overthrow their military dictatorship. But that was a sobering lesson as we look back, that we cannot expect that simply because we want something to be so, that it will be so. It's a lot of struggle. And many of us have spent the last 50 years fighting much of that dictatorship. And now we're looking forward, if Marcos wins Jr., that we're going to be facing the same thing again, and we will be out in the streets. But this time, instead of being able to lobby Congress to cut the aid, Marcos Jr. will rely on China, not the US, but China, to prop up his dictatorship. And as someone pointed out, he doesn't even need to declare martial law. Duterte has laid the grounds for him to rule by decree, to rule with control of the courts and the Congress. So as we discuss, what are we going to do? What lessons have we learned, or can we learn? Can we sum up to plan our opposition to what hopefully doesn't happen? Certainly Loida believes it will not happen, and I share that hope. But we're also realistic that if Marcos Jr. becomes president, that we're ready to go back to what we did back in '72. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to take off from Rodel's last point. Sorry. I'd like to take off from Rodel's last point, which is, you thought that martial law would never happen in the Philippines. You had that confidence. And I'm wondering, and all of you seem to be confident that the opposition is going to win this election. But I want to push back a little bit and think, why was martial law appealing? Why is, Loida, you answered why Bongbong is appealing, but are we underestimating the strength of support, of genuine support, not support caused by disinformation or propaganda or money, but are we underestimating the genuine support for the Marcoses? In 1972, there was really support for a more stable, a stronger government, given the chaos all around. And there is support for Duterte, who is a strong man. And even if the polls are wrong, we should concede that there is some support for Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Why is that?
Well, as I said, I already answered it. Okay, I answered it in the sense that when you talk to some of those who are for Marcos, they would say all of the lies. They are repeating all of the lies. So you say it often, you hear it on the radio, you see it on TikTok, you accept it as truth. So that's one aspect. But unlike Rodel, I still have faith that the ordinary people, the people that Vice President Leni Robredo has helped over the years of her 5 years as Vice President, they are going to talk and they are going to say to one another, she is the real thing. In other words, that is my belief and that is my faith. Yes, there are people who will, vote for, be with the Marcoses, the North, okay, those who have been brainwashed. But in the end, I know we have only 60 days, but in the end, 6 years ago, around this time, March 2016, Marcos Jr. was ahead. Leni was behind in the polls. But when the vote came, she won by 235,000 votes out of the 55 million that voted. So, yes, the polls are saying this, but I have faith. Again, I say I have faith in the Filipino people. When they know the truth, and they are knowing it now, because of our work, because of everybody's work, Marcos will fail.
So, Ed and Rodel, I'd like to ask you this question. Is it only because people are being lied to or are oblivious to the truth? Or is there really, does Bongbong have genuine appeal? And what in our society or in our psyche is he appealing to? Because, can we look at it from the perspective of voters who are genuinely and genuinely for him? And do you think it's just because they've been lied to or been deceived or manipulated by social media? Is there not a genuine, what do you call it, a reason why he is so appealing despite what we all know about him?
Well, if I could, let me just say that when Cory became president after People Power, there were at least 7 coup attempts against her, and she spent much of her 6 years staying alive, surviving all of these coup attempts. She was not able to focus on a lot of what would be necessary to rebuild the infrastructure, and I mean including the educational infrastructure. So the people that Marcos installed in the education department that would be writing up the history books and learning lessons were still the Marcos people, because Cory was not able to replace them with people who would be able to educate the young ones about what happened during martial law. So that for 20, 30, 40 years, even up to today, the history books still had Marcos appearing like he was the hero. I mean, a lot of what we believe to be, with what we know to be misconceptions, became embedded in the education of the Filipino people. So a lot of the young people grew up thinking that this was a golden era. A lot of the Marcos propaganda became institutionalized. So people who grew up with that, who never knew what happened under martial law, how they enriched themselves, the people who were killed and tortured, that was not part of their education. So when you ask, is it just because they're brainwashed? Yes, but it was very insidious. It was part of the educational upbringing, and Marcos Jr. is capitalizing on a lot of that. So when he speaks about the golden period under his father, a lot of young people don't know any better because they weren't educated about what really happened. So that's why it's not as simple to say, are they just brainwashed with all of the current? No, it's not just what's on TikTok or what Cambridge Analytica puts out on social media. A lot of it has been for the last 50 years since martial law was declared.
Well, let me just read some of the comments here in the chat. So there is Arthur Medell saying, he thinks the support for Marcos Duterte is that people are exhausted by the chaos of democracy. And Sidney Jones says it's because of the unchanged socioeconomic structure of the Philippines. Nothing has changed. The power of clans and families. Nothing has changed. A hugely dysfunctional criminal justice system. So your thoughts, Ed, do all of these reasons, are all these reasons relevant? I mean, do they account for the appeal, for the strongman appeal? And remember, all around the world, strongmen are having a moment. It is a strongman moment. It is a populist moment.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that, you know, this is the March, the International Month of Women. I just want to say, in the Philippines, women are making a huge difference. And Maria Ressa won the Nobel Peace Prize, the first Filipino to win the Nobel Peace Prize, kept reminding us that 3 out of every 4 Filipinos gather their information, their news, they draw it from social media rather than mainstream news outlets. And the power of social media enables garbage in, garbage out. You know, Marcos Jr. is sold like a commodity. He only has one word. If you want to sum up his rallies, and I have been listening to the different political rallies during the past several months, one word, in Filipino, pagkakaisa. Magkaisa na tayo. Let's be one, you know. Unity. And he is presented as an amiable friend. You know, in other words, there's really a rebranding, you know, especially for young people, young first-time voters who never experienced the past. And that's why I had said earlier, the struggle against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. Is precisely people would rather forget, move on, he says, no, move on and unify. But, you know, you cannot move on unless you re-examine and reflect on your past. So, you know, the women journalists in Rappler, for example, or our women athletes, you know, because right now there are groups or religious women, you know, are coming up endorsing Leni Robredo every single day. Educators, university presidents, lawyers, doctors, people who have, you know, any influence in society are coming together and saying to our people, do not forget, do not give up. For those of us, I think I can see that there are something like 105 participants in this forum. I just want you to remind you of the scale of the challenge. You know, because I remember in the last elections in the US, I normally read the polls in Politico, and every single day there were polls. Now, in the Philippines, it's released every other or every month. The Pulse Asia polls on presidential preferences was Marcos at 60%. The second was Leni Robredo, and she had 16%. It's a 44% deficit. That's how huge the challenge is. It's as if you're playing basketball, if you're playing sports, and you come up, you know, you come out of the court and you play with a 44 points deficit. It's huge. But you know what? There's something happening in this country. There's something happening, and I can summarize it. I hope you don't mind, you know, just taking a little more time. You said the 3 I's. For me, it's the 3 I's. Number 1, imagination. Number 2, inclusion. And number 3, inspiration. The first one is we are reimagining resistance. You know, the campaign of Leni Robredo is a people-driven, a volunteer-driven people's campaign. You know, unlike in the past, the one who spends for the campaign on the ground, like yesterday in Cavite, or the other days in Iloilo or Cebu, it was people driven. It was incredible, and the amount of joy. Lenny normally starts her campaign. There's a big sign right now coming out. Let Lenny read. Because what she starts to do in every campaign is read the posters. She's reading the posters that young people are putting up. They write their own posters, and it's really fun, joyful, imaginative. The second one is the reason why she chose the color pink. By the way, Loida, your coat is pink, beautiful. The reason why she chose pink is because she wanted to be inclusive. Marcos had prepared his campaign to bombast the color yellow because he wanted to associate her with a fraction of political opposition in the past, which had been tarnished, and so the choice of a color pink was brilliant, because it expressed the inclusivity, the capacity to include all different sectors and all different social classes in society. And pink is beautiful. It's different. Who would imagine men in pink? But that's what's happening in the country. And then finally, her campaign is able to inspire a generation to make young people rethink. I think a lot of people are reflecting. That the choices that we have to make, the choices are important. And what her campaign is doing is to ensure that people are genuinely inspired to do something for others, which is not normally an ingredient in our electoral campaigns. Finally, let me just say about the moment. I have just written a piece I have submitted to several outlets entitled "Courage," and it's really about my reflection on Volodymyr Zelensky. He was the Dancing with the Stars champion of Ukraine. He was an actor who appeared in the series called Servant of the People, which was about an absent-minded history professor whose diatribe against the government in power became viral, and then they want him to become an accidental candidate. And so in reality, he forms a party, or a party is formed around Servant of the People. In December of 2020, I actually wrote a book about my former student. You see, Lenny Robredo was my student in sophomore class at UP, a servant leader. And that's what, in a sense, Lenny provides, the qualities of servant leader. And so I want to end by saying this, that servant leader is really the key. A lot of people are beginning to rethink these elections. I am certain, similar to what Loida said earlier. Last night, they tried all roadblocks to make it difficult for the rally in Cavite to take place. So there were hours and hours of traffic because roads were closed, and Lenny could not arrive at the venue of the rally. So she had to make angkas. How do you say that in English? To make angkas on a motorbike. She had to look for a guy who had a motorcycle. She rode at the back of the motorcycle and arrived at the venue of the rally to a rock star reception. And it was such a joyful experience, an inspiring experience. And this is what we're going through. Zelensky has become a symbol of courage. In our country, there are women who have become symbols of courage, and Leni Robredo, more than anyone else, an icon of courage at this time, because the odds are great, but she has not given up. And as I said earlier, this is the source of our joyful hope. This is the joyful hope sweeping the country at this moment. And that's what the surveys fail to grasp at this stage, because a survey is only one moment in time, And so I shared the hope that our other panelists have provided. And I want to thank you for this opportunity. There's so much more to say. And please forgive me for taking too much time.
Thank you, Ed. I'd like to pick up from your point, which is, you are all veterans of the anti-Marcos struggle. And Ed, you talked a little bit about how, the reimagining resistance and how this campaign is. But are there, as you all said, this is a totally younger generation, no memory of Marcos. They spend more time on their devices than in person, especially with the pandemic, than in in-person interaction. Do the tactics that people have used in fighting Marcos, do they still apply? And Rodel, you talked about what you did, demonstrations, lobbying in Congress, etc. Do they still apply now? And if not, how else do we reimagine reaching out to a generation that has no memory of the Marcos presidency? Rodel or Loida, do you want to take that question? Yeah.
Let me take a crack. Right now, it is mano a mano, all time. Go back to the old way of knocking on doors, talking, having a conversation, the lugawan for Leni. That is the effectiveness. And you have to win votes one at a time. The demonstration is against, the government, but the government has been ineffective. There has been no good response to the pandemic. The response to the drug problem is to kill 20,000 people that can fill up Araneta Coliseum. So you cannot look at and rally against the government. For us who are here, 100 of us, 109 of us, it is every day calling back home on Viber, on WhatsApp, and talking to the children of or your bandera or your driver, and talk in Tagalog or talk in Bicol or Higalaynon, because that is what Leni is asking us. She is asking us to connect with one another. And that's the kind of resistance that we should do now.
Rodel, yeah.
Yeah. What has been inspiring in the last week is seeing the resistance of the Ukrainian people to the invasion of Putin. It is so inspiring when you see on the news a young couple getting married, and the next day they would get up, get their guns and fight to defend Kiev and be willing to die for freedom. That is inspiring the world. It's not just Zelensky. And I hope that people in the Philippines who are watching what's happening in Ukraine and who have heard Marcos Jr. say that the Filipinos should not be involved, should not take a position, should not support Ukraine because that's not, certainly that's the mentality of Marcos Jr., but I don't think the Filipino people will look up to that. I think they will, if they're able to see what is going on in Ukraine, be inspired to fight for freedom, for democracy, for being able to not be under China or Russia. And perhaps that's the kind of message we should be pushing out there, that if you want the Philippines to progress, to fight, to have our democratic rights, our freedoms, then go with Leni Robredo. And I think that would be the lesson of Ukraine for us.
I'm going to ask one more question, but I'd like people to ask questions here using the chat box if you have questions. And there are a number of comments here, and a lot of them have to do with the educational system, and again the failures of the past. Someone here, I'm sorry, my link is being used by other people, so that's not me commenting here in the chat box, but someone here who's named Sheila Coronel has said, the situation is very different now from 1972. Today, people know what martial law did. So this kind of contradicts what you all have been saying, saying here that people are aware of how martial law, the effects of martial law, and also the effects of Duterte. Most have suffered. So saying that the political situation is really very different, and therefore more, I'm guessing the conclusion is much more open to change. So people have varying impressions about the openness to change, and about the reasons why the Marcoses remain attractive. Let me just ask this question: what does Leni Robredo represent? Is she just an anti-Marcos? Is Marcos really what this election is about? Is Leni just, I am not Marcos, I am not going to bring back Marcos? What does she really stand for? Because we're talking about people power here. I mean, what does Leni stand for, and why would she be attractive to this new generation of Filipinos?
Well, Leni has proven, since she was a congresswoman and as vice president, she has proven that she is working for the people, a true servant. She did not, she did not enrich herself. She still lives in the apartment in Manila that is owned by her mother-in-law. She doesn't live in Bel Air or in San Lorenzo Village or Corinthian Gardens. So she has lived a life of integrity, living within her means. And since she became vice president, she was taken out of the cabinet position, but she was able to start Angat Buhay, giving jobs to around 300,000 people, education, telemedicine. During the time of the pandemic, she was the one who had a plan distributing tests and things like that. So in other words, if you listen to her during the debate, she has plans of government that is not just, I will bring, that is not just pie in the sky. She has done them. Okay. And so contrast that with what has Marcos done? Nothing. He has not started any law on his own, whereas Leni, in the 3 years that she has done, has spent a lot of bills, and out of them, 11 have become laws. Okay, so that's only for the 3 years that she was congresswoman. And while she was just in one typhoon, the last typhoon that wreaked havoc on Visayas, where was she? 24 hours, she was there right in the middle. Whereas what happened to Marcos, the Marcos family, they were having a party because a celebrity was being there. So just contrast who is the right person to lead the Philippines. Somebody who parties at the time of disaster, or somebody who is right there bringing food, bringing things, water, blanket, and food during a time of typhoon. So that's the kind of person, that's the kind of president we need. Somebody who will answer to the needs of those who are in the laylayan ng sosyedad. That's Leni Robredo.
So let me ask, because I saw the results of the last elections, the midterm elections in 2019. People like the liberal opposition lost badly, lost really, really badly. In no other election has there been a zero win for the opposition in the Senate, and that happened in 2019. Chel Diokno won in Dasmariñas village, but not in places like Tondo or the slum areas of Quezon City where the drug war killings were happening, right? So is Lenny Robredo's appeal really a middle class appeal, an urban middle class appeal like EDSA was, the People Power was, an urban middle class uprising? Who wants to take that? Rodel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen the rallies that with 20, 30,000 people at Quezon Memorial, in Cebu, in all of these places, and you see people going in tricycles or bicycles or walking. These are people who are being inspired. I think Lenny represents decency, and a lot of people have seen what corruption has done, has seen the poverty around them, and seen all of these going on. And Lenny represents someone who looks for the best in the Filipino people. You know, when she came to the US to help her daughter get settled in school, she went around to get secondhand furniture for that. The Marcos Jr. people ridiculed her and said she was a garbage lady because she was picking furniture from the garbage. Not like Marcos Jr., but of course he has billions of dollars to spend on all the furniture he needs. But people can relate that you get whatever modest furniture or goods you can get to survive. So that's a representation of what people can see and look up to for the future.
There's a question here from Christina Neward. What is the overlap between Duterte supporters and Bongbong Marcos supporters look like? And does it deviate in similar ways? I mean, are the same people who are supporting Bongbong also supporting, I'm guessing here, President Duterte? And does Bongbong Marcos poll as strongly in Mindanao as Duterte did with Sara on his ticket? Does anyone have an answer here? Is there are the same people supporting Bongbong Marcos the same people supporting Duterte?
Well, as I said, when Sara said she's not running for president because she was polling at 25%, Marcos was number 2. When they were all running for president, Marcos was below Sara. So when Sara moved to number 2, Bongbong, that created the 50%. So your question, are the Duterte people going for Marcos? I would say yes. And why is that? Because evil is attractive. Right? And I can only say that with Duterte, evil has survived. The amount of corruption, of taking money right in front of our eyes is so atrocious that for some people, for our Filipinos, some Filipinos, and I think they are in a minority, eventually come May 9, their evil is attractive. Deception is accepted. Pagmumura, being lascivious is accepted. That's the worst part of the Filipino nature. And I still believe we are not like that.
So Christina, I think what Loida is saying is that the Dutertes have Mindanao, they have the southern vote, and the Marcoses are very strong in the north. So the two of them together make a very strong team. But I would dare say there's also an overlap between the two because both are strong in Manila. I mean, Duterte won resoundingly in Manila in 2016, and Sara Duterte is also strong in Manila, although I would say her base really is Mindanao. Rodel, this is, I think, a question for you. We have seen an unprecedented engagement of Filipinos overseas, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Would you care to make a forecast on the extent in which the elections will be determined by overseas voters?
Well, no, I don't see Philippine overseas voters as having an impact in terms of their votes. I see overseas voters as having an impact on the relatives that they send the billions of pesos in remittances to, that they communicate with, the people who they can rely on for news and information. So not so much in votes, but in influence. That's where I see the power of Filipino voters overseas.
You mean that they influence their families back home?
I would hope so, and I believe there's a number of there's evidence that would show at least a lot of anecdotal evidence of the kind of influence that overseas Filipinos, even in the Middle East and in US, in Europe. I think that's where.
So Rodel, some time ago, I was just searching in Facebook to look at Bongbong Marcos pages. There's a lot of them in the US. I don't know if that's any indication of the actual support that Bongbong has here, but I think there is also substantial support for Bongbong Marcos and maybe for the others as well.
I would say, just looking at the rally that Marcos had here in Queens, okay, the Lenny Robredo rally had much more people than the Marcos rally. There was a rally, but in terms of numbers, there were more in the rally of Lenny Robredo.
So there are several questions here about COMELEC and the integrity of the vote. And let's talk about that. Both in terms of vote buying, but also in terms of manipulation. Yes, Ed. Yeah.
I'd like to, given some of the thoughts that were expressed and also reading some of the comments, allow me to share my thoughts on three things very briefly. The Lenny focus, the Lenny campaign, and then the Lenny legacy. The first one, VP Lenny has a laser-like focus on inclusion. Her focus on making poverty history and reducing inequality. For me, those are the major problems we are facing as a people. How do you deal with poverty and inequality? And that's what she is focused on. She has three major programs that she is espousing. Public health, a return to normalcy, dealing with the pandemic. Inclusive economy, ensuring that those people who lost their jobs and those who have no livelihoods, get the break. And thirdly, education. You see, online education in this country is really, really difficult because there are so many people who do not have online capacities. And therefore, there's a generation losing an opportunity to learn more. So, in other words, for me, that's her focus, and laylayan sa lipunan, the dealing with the people on the fringes of society, in a sense, sums up what she's all about. Number two, the campaign. Do you know what's the strategy that I find is very important? Right now, she is focusing on the areas where she is strong. So where? Bicol, all right, the provinces of Bicol, Western Visayas and Central Visayas, and even Eastern Visayas except Leyte. And then Northern Mindanao, including the Zamboanga Peninsula. And then lately, what she's now doing is Southern Tagalog and Central Luzon. This is brilliant kind of campaigning because you are consolidating in a sense, your base. And this is what we're seeing, an incredible amount, a surge of enthusiasm of people supporting her, which is not evident in any of the other campaigns, because this is coming from the passion of the young people, of the first-time voters, of those who want to support her. And people are going there with their own means, making up their own placards with wit and with grit. And this is very important. And then finally, that campaign also, look, I'm just one person, even before, when I talked to her and she said to me, the presidency is destiny, I said to myself, no, you need to prepare. And that's the reason why I actually began writing this book behind her back, because I wanted to create a groundswell to say, hey, it's important that you consider running. And so, but that's not enough, So and I'm just one person. I did this comics, in 8 dialects, 8 languages, including Ilocano and Pangasinan. And I'm just one person. This is comics. And there's a video to this comics, 5 minutes, done by Voyage Film Studios. Another version of the comics in pink. And then we have this e-letters to young voters, e-letters to young voters. What I'm saying is that a lot of volunteer activity, many other people are doing much more. And this is important. And finally, legacy. What she represents more than any other candidate, is hope. This is what is really important in our time. People are desperate. And it is no coincidence that what is taking place in Ukraine, as Rodel said earlier, which is the resistance of people, every single man, woman, and child, led by an accidental candidate who becomes president. And in a sense, she is the widow who becomes the accidental candidate. And again, right now, she is the accidental, presidential aspirant who is there not because she wants to. In fact, all her daughters want her to, spend more time with them and not, be in public office. For her, this is a sacrifice. But this is what I think is very inspiring. And she's able to relate to young people. You know what's going on in this country right now? In every single rally that has taken place in the last several weeks, there's so many stories are surging and people are sharing that demonstrate how she's able to relate to people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And this is what's giving hope. And for me, that is why I believe that 44%, maybe to many Americans listening now and say, can you even think of overcoming a 44% deficit in the polls? All I can say is, yes, you can.
Yeah, there was a question actually about the deficit. It says Marcos is polling at around 60 at the
Yes.
moment, and Lenny is polling at around 20,
16 or 20, yeah.
around 20. So there is a big gap. So let me just ask this: in the elections that I have seen, there's a very strong emotional component. The ones where the presidents won. I mean, certainly Duterte appealed to, law, order, we need to get rid of drug lords and criminals. Noynoy Aquino before that was an emotional choice because of the death of his mother, right? So do you see an emotional component that would mobilize, close that gap? I agree there has been a lot of volunteerism in the Lenny campaign, much more than any other candidates. But to swing that other 40%, you need something, like Americans, Filipinos like to fall in love with their candidates. Is there,
Three words.
Yeah.
Courage, love, and hope. This is what VP Lenny represents, no? Courage. A widow who overcomes tragedy, a widow who overcomes...
we've seen that movie before.
Yes.
Are we suffering here from people power nostalgia? I'm just going to make this interesting. I'm sorry, by contradicting you guys. I'm just going to push back. Yeah, this is...
Allow me just to finish 1 point.
years ago, yeah.
Courage, love, and hope. This is why, this campaign is different, the courage and the love and the hope which people draw from these gatherings. And all of us who are watching it, many of us are watching the rally every night because we're able to follow it in social media. And that's the incredible, advantage of social media now, because everyone who has a cell phone in the Philippines, they're able to follow the campaign wherever they are.
Right, yeah.
And I want to tell you, many of my students, let's say I'm a life coach of many of the athletes in basketball, football, and volleyball at Far Eastern University. And many of them are beginning to, band together, not only university presidents or teachers or lawyers or doctors for Lenny, but athletes for Lenny. Yeah. And I just wanted to say to you, one placard one of the players put was very witty. It says, "Tama raw See, Lenny, do you know Far Eastern University has a mascot? It's FEU Tamaraws.
Tamaraw, yeah.
They make a play on words. Tama Raw.
Yeah.
See, Lenny. It's
And I think Rodel wants to say something. Okay, Rodel. Yeah.
Thank you. The question you had posed before Ed answered was about the COMELEC, and
Yes.
we never got to that question.
Yes,
which
I
you
was going
asked,
to bring it
and,
up again. Yeah.
Yes, so I'd like to just focus on that because that is extremely worrisome. There have been 7 or 8 petitions to disqualify Marcos, all absolutely meritorious. I mean, he is a convicted criminal. Ed talked about a sign that said "Vote with conviction" for Lenny. Those who support Bongbong, it's vote for conviction. That is a convicted criminal who has been found guilty of tax evasion and who is even in the U.S. subject to arrest for criminal convictions that occurred in Hawaii. So, but the problem is Duterte's people run the COMELEC and they're quashing all of these disqualification cases. And there's a lot of talk that maybe this is a ploy by Duterte so that when it goes to the Supreme Court after the elections that they presumably Marcos Jr. wins, that the Supreme Court can then disqualify him, make the vice president, Sara, as president. There's a lot of talk about that. What concerns me, by the way, is that the people who will do the counting, who control the mechanisms of the elections, are being headed by this guy, Dennis Uy, who is the head of F2 Logistics, who, by our action, Loida and myself, about the Malampaya issue that we filed with the ombudsman, is making $1 million a day in profits that should have gone to the Filipino people, but instead are going to his pocket. And he knows if Lenny wins, that's going to be gone. So there's a lot of our concern that he will do everything to make sure that Lenny loses so that he can continue to receive the money. So that's a concern, and hopefully we will be able to stop the manipulation, the way that it works in previous elections.
So there is a comment here about the theme of autocracy versus democracy playing worldwide before our eyes in Ukraine, and how that can be inspiring, as you said, but is that really what this election is about? Is this an election about autocracy versus democracy? Do you really think Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has what it takes to be a dictator?
He doesn't need to be a dictator, because the way the setup is done is that the presidency has become one where you rule by decree, the way Duterte is run. So it's not just autocracy, it's also kleptocracy. I mean, this is what, the fact that it's Marcos Jr. and Sara who represent the dynastic rule in the Philippines. So all the dynasties in all the provinces, they're all wanting to make sure that dynastic rule continues as it has in the past. So
this is an election about families, then, about political clans and political families.
Well, not Lenny. Lenny.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's political clans versus sort of reformist, civil society oriented types of politics.
Yes.
Correct. What is happening now is lahat ng magnanakaw, lahat ng kleptocracy is on one side. If you saw that picture of Bongbong and Sara and Imelda Marcos and Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo and Erap Estrada and Revilla, lahat yung mga nagnanakaw is on one side. So what is this about, this election? Whether we will exist continuously as a nation where those in power will get all, and then the poor will continue to become poor. And that's why we are outside of the United States. Lenny's concern is to have the Philippines a place where people can choose to stay or they can choose to leave. Not that there is only one choice, we have to go out, but that we will have enough economic power so that going abroad is not going to be mandatory, but a choice.
There is a very interesting comment here from Don Tagala, and his question is, Plan A is to do absolutely everything supporters can for Lenny to win at all costs. But with BBM polling higher than Lenny, what is Plan B? If for whatever reason he wins the elections, what happens next? Are you ready for 6 years of Marcos or more? What is the plan?
There is no plan. There is no plan. Okay? There is no plan because the voice of the people is the voice of God. In other words, the people, for their own, for whatever reason, has not seen the truth or does not want the truth or believes the lie, then we deserve the government that we vote for. Much like in the United States, they voted for Trump, we deserve the deaths. 500, nearly 700,000 died because there was no plan to meet the virus. And all the things that happened during the time of Trump, the people wanted it, and so finally, for Biden, at least 6 million people said no to Trump. So in the Philippines, if our people choose the negative, the Marcos family once again, and all of that kleptocracy, all of that corruption, then the people deserve what they will get, which is more poor, and all that. So that's the plan.
Rodel, are you coughing in protest or?
Yes, I disagree. I mean, we've seen this before. Elections are easily manipulated with money. The goons, guns, and gold of Marcos has been resurrected. So, people do not deserve the Russians invading their country or Putin controlling. Tyranny has a way of running for a while, but as Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards justice, or the history. So I don't think in that sense that if Marcos wins, that's not the will of the people, that's the will of money, that's the will of the manipulation of the dynasties. And we will be prepared. I mean, we'll go in front of the consulate. We'll go every time any one of the Marcos officials, junior officials come, we will protest. All of those may be of the past, but they certainly, whatever we can through social media, through whatever means, we will not go quietly into the night. Marcos will find opposition everywhere he goes. In the Philippines, where all of those who support Lenny with their pink placards and everything else, that will be the vanguard of the opposition to Marcos Jr. And that will be stronger than what we've ever had in the past.
Ed, yes.
Yeah, I saw. I'm reading some of the comments that of the participants. I just saw a comment from Sydney Jones. Sydney, is that you, my former colleague from Amnesty International? Is that Sydney Jones, who used to work?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Because what she said is very true. What we have, is essentially, unchanged socio-political and socio-economic structures, and that's what we need to break. That's why I said earlier, the focus of VP Lenny Robredo is essentially dealing with poverty and inequality. There's no running away from this fact. Number two, if you can see the passion for the possible, which is what is taking place right now in this country. Right now, everywhere she goes, the passion for the possible is really, really palpable. You can feel it, and this is going to be a movement beyond the 2022 elections. I can assure you, if she does not win, but she will win, the people are ready to create a movement that will be beyond the 2022 elections. In fact, even, this movement has to be vigilant. Even if she wins, and she will win, the people have to remain vigilant, to participate, to be involved, to be engaged. And so I believe in our young people. I have been a teacher for 35 years, maybe four decades. And I can tell you, this new generation of people, these digital natives, are telling us, are showing us there are many different ways of demonstrating people's power, not only on the streets, but on your screens, on your phones, which most people are at least in the Philippines, they're attached to this. And the role of the international community, I just want to salute you in the US especially, because the influence you generate, the power you harness by talking to your relatives and friends, to us, it's very, very important we keep this networking alive. Sometimes you have a better grasp of technical facilities that will help us to expand our reach, to make our message more attractive to other sectors of society. So we have to keep this going, this dialogue. The reason why I participated here, is precisely because I see the value of this synergy, of this chemistry between global Filipinos and those of us who are on the ground right now here. We need this synergy, and therefore that's why I think we're turning the tables. As Loida said earlier, almost one by one. But that's why in Cavite, just to give you another example from last night, there was a huge sign. It was sold 800,000 minus one. What the people were trying to say was the governor of Cavite, Remulla, promised Bongbong Marcos, I will deliver 800,000 votes to you. And what people were saying by attending the rally, minus me, minus one. And then so after the rally, a lot of people said, all right, governor, all right, how many people remain from your 800,000? Because we are here, body and soul, to demonstrate with you that not all the local political leaders can deliver. No, we have a mind of our own. We think on our feet, and we will do what we believe in. And this is what's happening, especially the young people, the young people in this country. And this is what's making a difference.
Okay, two questions here. Yeah, thank you, Ed. There are two questions here. One is, what will the military do if it's a fraudulent election? And then a second one is, what is the position of the left in the coming elections? Anyone cares to answer any or both of those questions? What will the military do? Yeah.
Makabayan, well, just Makabayan with Nery Colmenares, joining most of the rallies, are supporting VP Lenny, and even the group of Walden Bello and Leody, they are really attacking Marcos. Essentially, they're putting him down and his colleagues. That's why there is a candidate for the Senate, who just put down Harry Roque and Gadon, Larry Gadon, and so many people have said, let's bring him, Luke Spiritu, let's bring him to the Senate, to show you how people in the left, are becoming part of this conversation in a very vital way. Now, regarding the military, I simply want to say, I have former students who have become part of the military. Obviously, many of them are going to obey the Constitution. I think it's a good sign that they have learned their lesson, I hope. Of course, there will be those who will be manipulated, but I believe that we are past that stage at this moment. That's my own belief. I may be wrong, but I don't think that a throwback to that age is possible in this time.
Do you agree, Loida? Yeah.
said regarding the military, they will abide by the Constitution. Although I know they are for Lenny because they have seen the corruption. And
That's right.
PMA are for honor, for country, for God. That's the first question. For the second question, what was your second question?
The second one is to the left.
The left. Well, I have heard Walden Bello say that they are neutral towards the war towards the invasion of Russia. How can you be neutral with that? So I'm a little leery of that stand by Walden Bello.
So are we going to believe that this information of the Duterte and Marcos camp that people power is a thing of the past? Is people power a thing of the past?
It's happening now.
It's being reinvented.
It's happening now. As Ed is saying, the people in each of the cities that you have seen, that's people power. Okay? So it's happening now. They will be surprised because I do believe Lenny will still win. Lenny will win. And that's what I read there from Jane Fields. Lenny will win.
There is Evangeline Beltran here has asked a couple of questions about Lenny's position on reproductive rights. And she's saying that unlike Lenny, Ping Lacson is the real feminist because Lacson has endorsed, women's reproductive rights, and Lenny is kind of not.
Lenny's Catholic through and through. Okay, she's Catholic through and through. There is no question.
Okay, there's a question here. How do we know that it's going? How do you prove it's a fraudulent election? As they say, all the losers think they've been cheated, right? How do we know? And a more pertinent question is, does the opposition have the resources to guard the vote? Yeah.
I just want to say this. This is not a level playing field. Even from the very start, from the get-go, you are using the ill-gotten wealth to fund your campaign. You are using the ill-gotten wealth to buy the votes. Even now, I can tell you stories, but there's really no time, But the other thing is that you also have had 6 years head start. You are providing a rebranding that's false. News that is that's malicious. They have been. The Marcos camp. It's what they have done is really to completely deconstruct what elections are all about. And so as I said, this is really an uphill climb, a very difficult battle to wage. But as Zelensky and the Ukrainian people are showing us, it's not all about resources. The passion for the possible, as Soren Kierkegaard had said, is the meaning of hope, and then what I believe is happening is that, some of us have, I wrote I wrote a book based on what happened with Ocho Derecho, and the title of that was Defiant Hope. They buried us, as one of the placards said, they buried us. They did not know we were seeds. That defeat, that defeat was probably salutary. It was healthy because perhaps we have to recognize in all humility our shortcomings. But even if they buried us 8-0 in 2019, they did not know we were seeds. And that's what our young people are demonstrating today.
There's a question here about what are the chances that the other candidates are going to join together and support Lenny?
The supporters of the other candidates will support Lenny.
Not the other candidates. Like, I know there were talks with Isko, Manny Pacquiao, yeah?
Look, Manny Pacquiao is a great heart. I love that guy. And his running mate is my classmate, 4C in Ateneo High School. I tell them, look, you've got the heart, your heart's in the right place, but you've got to join, we have got to join forces, even if not the candidates, their supporters. Number two, Lacson. Lacson is a good man, although, we can question his past as police chief and his point on anti-terrorism law. But the point is, the supporters of Lacson, and Soto, the uncle of Vico Soto, the better Soto, they can support Lenny. I'm sure they will. Of course, Isko is very difficult to fathom because you don't know where he is, In fact, I wrote an open letter to him because Acción Democrático was founded by my very close friend, Raul Rocco. Raul, who worked with Ninoy Aquino, in his position initially on Marcos, was so ambivalent that, he hijacked the Acción Democrático party. He hijacked the party. He has joined 6 political parties. You don't know where he is, And now he wants to get the PDP Laban, the followers of Duterte and Marcos, because he's the second choice of many voters on his side. So I believe, to answer your question, it will be the supporters, the people around them, who will gravitate towards the person with the greatest chances of beating Marcos. That's my belief.
I think
Rodel?
what will happen as the election draws closer and Isko and Ping and Manny Pacquiao see that they're so far beyond any hope and they're very deep in campaign debt, is that Marcos Jr. will offer them money to endorse him, and in order to be able to overcome their debt, they will do the practical thing and they will endorse. So that is not going to be a surprise to me that when by the end, money will compel them to endorse Marcos Jr., even though, as you said, their supporters will support Lenny.
Loida, there's a question here about Isko Moreno's candidacy. Is he a true opposition candidate?
No, he's not. He's another Duterte. Beware. Beware of Isko Moreno. He is another Duterte.
Yeah.
During the debates, he was asked by Jessica Soho, and again during the CNN debates by Pia and Pinky Webb, what did you do with the 50 million pesos that you earned from your campaign? He actually, he pocketed 50 million, and I am sure, sometimes the campaign funds are a source of livelihood. And people like him, Isko Moreno, who has jumped from party to party according to the winds, he really is, he may be effective as a local government official, but he is not the principal leader that during these times, especially with the winds of war in Europe, because we need leaders, who can stand on principles. And Isko Moreno is certainly not one of them.
Well, let me also add, if you Google Dacer versus Estrada, Lacson, and Aquino, you will see that we won a $3 million judgment in San Francisco federal court. I represented the 4 daughters of Bobby Dacer. So we will strenuously disagree if you say that Ping Lacson is a good man. Far from it. He has a very solid, very dastard record of killing people from the Coratong Baleleng all the way through. So he cannot wash his hands of the blood of all the people that he's responsible for their deaths.
Correction accepted. Thank you.
My only hope is Manny Pacquiao, because he is born again. Hopefully he will withdraw. But that's it's all a matter of ego. People, there are people around them are saying, no, you have a chance, you have a chance. So it's very difficult for any of these presidential candidates to withdraw. The only one I'm hoping for is the left, Leonie and what's his name now? The vice president. So that's my only hope. But they only have maybe 1 million votes. But that could spell victory or defeat for Lenny.
So my last question is, what is the plan of the Lenny supporters to ensure, to guard the ballot? And what is the plan if it's a contested election? Or is there no plan? Or is it something that, you know, it is very real. Again, we've seen this before. First, how are you going to guard the ballot? And second, what will you do if the election is stolen? Will she accept the results?
Yeah.
What I know is that there are getting volunteer lawyers for every precinct. They're getting volunteer lawyers to be able to make sure that the votes are counted properly. Obviously, you know, contested elections are a fact of life in this country. Would you believe it was only recently that the election of Leni Robredo, for 5 years, she was hounded by the protest of Bongbong Marcos, which went up to the Supreme Court. In other words, when people ask Bongbong Marcos, what did you do since 2016? The only thing he did, and nothing else, was that protest, you know. Marcos needs a job. He has been jobless for so many years, you know. Where's his source of income? People ask him. You know, it's really absurd. What's going on? You know, what's going on here with Bongbong's 60% lead, you know?
No, wait, excuse me. Okay, that was earlier in January, 60%. Okay, SWS is later, but it was pressed, given to the press earlier. So the 60% was earlier, and the last one with Pulse Asia is later. And in that one, Bongbong fell down 10%, and Lenny was 19, 50, 19. So don't be fooled by that first 60%. It came later, but it really was done earlier. Just to correct.
Okay.
So the question is, does NAMFLO still exist?
No, it
no longer does, right?
It exists, but it's not recognized by the government. The government recognized, the NSFPDLIM. I don't know. I can't remember that.
So what is your scenario, Rodel? There's a fraudulent election. The results are contested. What's going to happen?
There will be protests. There will be people will be coming out in large numbers all over the country, not just in Manila on EDSA. It will be in plazas all over the country, and not just wearing pink, but although a lot of people will wear pink to just show the level of support that Lenny had, whose votes may not have been counted. So there will be continuous protest, and who knows where it will go at that point. But you know, people will not just quietly accept. People have a choice. Will they pick someone like Putin or someone like Zelensky? And I think what we have to show is that the forces of good represented by the people of Ukraine are in the Philippines represented by people who support Lenny. And the poor forces of evil are those like Marcos Jr., who is like Putin.
So here's a lawyerly question for you, Rodel. Can Bongbong Marcos actually be disqualified for tax evasion? Is this legally possible?
It's legally possible, but you have to have honest people in the COMELEC to be able to make that happen. And nobody has ever accused any of those COMELEC people of being honest and incorruptible.
No, I think one of the scenarios, because the COMELEC party, but one of the scenarios is that in appeal to the Supreme Court after the election, and once Bongbong and Sara have been proclaimed, that Bongbong will then be disqualified and then Sara becomes president. That's what
that is a commonly held belief. So, but let's not hold our breath that that's going to happen.
Yes, my own view is that 2016 will happen again. Lenny will win, and it's Bongbong who will file a protest.
Okay, I think we should end on that note. This has been a really interesting and passionate I could see a lot of energy still among this veteran anti-dictatorship warriors. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. There's a question with the media around. The media will be there. I think there will be international observers. But yes, let's see who's right about this election. And thank you so much for such an interesting and wonderful. John, would you like to formally close this?
Just want to thank all of our panelists, Loida, Rodel, and Ed for your contributions, and Sheila, as usual, for your masterful moderation and efforts to challenge everyone on their assumptions. Like to thank all of our sponsors again, and of course, Emily Tumale, who kind of helps to manage all of our logistics. If you know any folks who wanted to be here tonight but weren't able to make it, the recording of the webinar will be posted on the Sulo webpage, and we'll be, sending that around if you would like to post. We'll have both excerpts as well as the full event available for people who would like to experience it. But thank you so much for our panelists, and of course for Sheila for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat.